Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for coming. My name is Mark Johnston, CMO at Bombora. I'm joined today by Chris Moody from Gartner, formerly TOPO. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Mark.
And thank you all for joining. We're going to spend the next 30, 40 minutes or so talking about how winning marketers use intent data to accelerate account-based marketing outcomes. So let's go with it. A few housekeeping notes before we get into the presentation. Feel free to fire questions into the chat. We may take some of them as we go through the material, and the rest we will try our best to address at the end of the presentation. We've saved a bit of room for that as well. We'll also be sending out a link to the recording at the very same URL, I believe, that you all logged in. So without further ado, let's get into this. First up is making sure that Zoom works. Okay, cool. So before we get into talking about intent data and even ABM, we want to talk a little bit about the macro changes that have made account-based marketing popular. And they are threefold. First, people are tired of intrusion and irrelevant marketing. This is clear from what we're seeing around the developments around cookie blocking, GDPR, CCPA, and the sort of reaction to the fact that people, depending on the stats, see 10,000 messages a day. And that most of them, I think, we've got a research piece that 69% distrust advertising. So this sort of backlash against intrusive marketing, coupled with, from a business perspective, the way that businesses buy have changed. We have the convergence of research and the fact that businesses are about 60% of the way through their decision-making process by the time they get to sales, and that buying is influenced and made by a committee. And depending on the stats, that can be anywhere from 5 people up to 20 people. I think the average is 11, in fact, part of that buying committee, rather. And then finally, the never-ending pressure and demand for better sales and marketing performance from businesses on their sales and marketing teams, growth. And that is put in contrast of these first two dynamics. And so this is the landscape that we're operating in that has made ABM and then intent and some of the things we're going to talk about popular. So, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And one thing to build on, you mentioned that the buying committee is 11 stakeholders now. That's a huge number of folks to bring together. And we have seen, with an increased emphasis on virtual selling, number one, sellers are struggling to gain access to stakeholders. One stakeholder, much less 11. And then the second most common challenge is that bringing buying groups together virtually has been problematic in the world of virtual selling. So again, if we have to bring together 11 individual stakeholders in a B2B purchase to try to reach consensus, to win them over, to show the value that we can bring, and we struggle to gain access to the stakeholders virtually, we've created a situation where we have to be extremely efficient in who we target, how we target those specific folks, and then what the orchestrated play is for those individuals. And I think this really sets the stage for intent data and how we've seen that grow. As we jump to another stat, we predict at Gartner that by the end of 2022, more than 70% of B2B marketers will utilize third-party intent data to better target prospects or engage groups of buyers in selected accounts. We will stress today the reasons why we believe that this number is going to be delivered upon 70% of B2B marketers. And previously at TOPO, before the Gartner acquisition, intent data was one of the fastest growing categories we saw in high growth tech or high growth SaaS. So for a lot of the best in class teams that we've researched and studied, intent data is something that they're using on a daily basis to try to reach the right buyers at the right time, and then deliver a more precise, more tailored message.
Which brings us to the question, what is intent data? And as you pointed out, the market developing so quickly, we felt this at Bombora. Let's level set. This is actually the Gartner definition. Intent data: information collected about web users' observed behavior, business users, specifically content consumption that provides insights into their interest, and that indicates the potential to take an action. And we're getting at the reflection of the research that precedes a purchase. For Bombora, we have a particular way of looking at this and calculating that increase of interest, and it's called the company surge score. And it represents the intensity of the research increase or spike compared to the normal interest by a business in a topic or topics, and those topics are related to products and services that businesses sell. And what you're looking at here is the distribution of those scores, which are 60 and above are an increase in content consumption against the historical baseline. And what goes into this content consumption is at a high level, more people at a given company consuming more content that's of higher relevancy on these particular topics than they normally do. And the way that the curve distribution falls out is that most companies are not in research cycles. It says about 10 to 16%, those of 60 and above are experiencing or actively researching. So they have active intents. And that distribution is going to play an important dynamic as we play our way through using intent and ICP. So to keep that in mind.
Thanks, Mark. And really for today, we're structuring the conversation in 3 key areas where we're seeing intent data that is accelerating account-based outcomes. Quite literally is accelerating account-based outcomes. Not can, not will, not could. We are seeing that intent data is working today. And the 3 key areas are, number 1, to identify the right accounts or leads. Number 2, to prioritize the accounts or leads. And then number 3, the orchestration. So what we're actually doing with the intent data. And to get started, we're going to jump in on identify first. And the number 1 thing we always start with, if you look at a research and advisory firm, is going to be the ideal customer profile. So as we think about what our ideal customers are, and we can click to the example here, I'll walk you through this slide. There's a lot here. So before we even dig into the text, let's just set the stage and agree that every single one of us here today and every single person who will listen to the recording in the future, we need to better identify ideal accounts. We need to find the accounts that we should be pursuing. We want to find people who are able to buy us, who should be buying us, where we have a use case that we know works, where we know that we can make more money than a normal account. We're trying to find the right accounts to pursue here. And if we focus on the line where we have ICP there, ideal customer profile, we are literally narrowing from our target market into a smaller set of target accounts, and then ultimately into a selected segment of accounts where we should spend more time, more energy, more effort, more dollars to go and close ideal accounts. As we go through this today, we'll talk about why this is so important to understand intent data's place in the pursuit of selected accounts. But for many folks, for many organizations, the starting point is going to be here on the ideal customer profile and starting to find which accounts we should go and pursue. This is the traditional approach to starting account-based. Now, to find your ideal customers, this is normally the first trap. We say, yes, we should have our ideal accounts. We should do that. Now what, Chris? And if we don't have a tool that does this for us automatically, what do we need to do? What do we need to report on? What information do we need, knowing that we have both quantitative information and qualitative information that we have to pull together? And 4 quick things that we always refer to when we're talking about an ideal customer profile. Number 1, let's understand accounts that we have won versus accounts that we have lost. What are some of the differences? What do we see the common attributes are for our closed won accounts? Are there certain industries where we're closing the most? Are there certain use cases? Is it a specific title that's making us close more deals? Number 2, let's compare our high value accounts versus our low value accounts. What do we notice the commonalities are of the accounts that are paying us the most money, of the accounts that are most likely to renew, which is number 3. So if we know that we have accounts that we can renew with less effort, or that we are extremely sticky in a certain space, whatever that attribute is, firmographic, technographic, anything, demographic, whatever it is, we want to identify those accounts that are most likely to renew. And then 4th, most likely to grow. So if we're seeing cross-sell, upsell, expansion, anything that's happening in existing accounts, we want to understand that. Now, I've thrown all of that at you and your head's probably spinning a bit thinking, how do we pull all this information together? And that is the first conundrum we have with the ideal customer profile. It's difficult to wrangle all this information and figure out where we should focus first. And this is kind of a reiteration of what I was saying before, but quite literally, the ICP is going to identify the types of accounts that will receive a significant and disproportionate share of go-to-market investment and resources. The first thing we have to agree to deliver on this is to say that we should be spending more time, energy, money on accounts that have the highest likelihood to close, the highest potential deal size, the highest likelihood to renew, everything that we just mentioned. That's what we're trying to do with the ideal customer profile. And then we see that this is a very important thing for many organizations. So over half of organizations have reevaluated or plan to reevaluate their ideal customer profile and target markets in 2020. Now, a lot of this is happening as COVID-19 was growing and expanding in the pandemic. So just to put a timestamp on it, organizations were trying to evaluate, where should we be spending our time? Where can we go and close the most accounts? And this continues today. It's a conversation that we have on a daily basis at Gartner. And then this is where things start to get fun. If we take our ideal customer profile and everything that I just walked you through, and then we start to marry that with intent data, we can see some great possibilities that we're going to explore as we continue the conversation today. But intent data works with or without an ideal customer profile. Everything that we just talked through, it's not the easiest thing in the world to do, to find our ideal customer profile, to find the common attributes of what determines our top 500 accounts, our top 1,000 accounts. Intent data is actually looking for folks who are researching you or your industry or some buying signal to say, this is someone you should go and speak with. And that could be outside of the ideal customer profile that we have built or configured. That could be for valid reasons where, okay, yes, the ICP is perfect. We still see intent in other areas that we should explore. Or it could actually be that maybe we didn't do the best job on our ICP. Maybe it's too narrow. Maybe we could expand the focus. So either way, we'll talk through both scenarios of how an ideal customer profile and intent data can work together, which leads us into prioritization. Honestly, one of the most important things we can do.
Which then sets up or brings a call back to what we're talking about in terms of the ICP, which is all of the potential customers versus the number of customers that are actually in market. And we see marketers often benchmarking their engagement with their ICP, but not discounting for the fact that 100% of that ICP list is in market. So as we would understand, all companies are not always buying all products. They go through research cycles depending on need. So to the slide with the Venn diagrams, we are looking at both intent as well as ICP, pursuing those on parallel tracks. And that overlap is that 16% of in market, which is the sweet spot. But to Chris's point about using both of those and making them not entirely dependent frees up marketers to get some results more quickly and to prioritize resource allocation and frankly to maybe sometimes shortcut the process, the onerous one of creating an ICP.
I love that, Mark. That's a great data point. And we could slap the 15%, 16%, whichever we're trending towards now, right in the middle here. But if we break down each of the 3 sections in this diagram, if we look at intent alone first, so on the far right of your screen, Intent data prioritizes accounts and leads with or without an ideal customer profile. So if the ICP is too difficult, if you don't have time to do it, if marketing and sales maybe aren't working the best together to pull together all this information, maybe you don't have great historical data, you can still pursue prioritized accounts with intent, which we're talking about prioritization. Now, if we look at the middle section, when we have intent data from our ideal customers, that's our highest priority. That should be the top of the line, the very A+ account. I call it Disney Fast Pass sometimes, no affiliation. I'm not a shareholder, just have to disclose that for Gartner rules. But that's skipping the line. We're bypassing every other account when we have, yes, this is the right account you should be focused on, and we see intent. And then thirdly, the ideal customer profile without intent data, those are still extremely important. We're still going to focus on those, but it's not the same urgency as someone who is ready to buy right now or researching the process currently, which is what we're trying to do when we talk about prioritization. And then when we start to visualize this, this is from the double funnel. So this is published at TOPO and is being republished inside of Gartner with some new tweaks and improvements. But when we look at our account-based funnel at the very top there, we're starting with target accounts, which are coming from our ideal customer profile. Then we're moving into engagement. Now for leads, the engaged lead is typically the MQL. That's going to be your marketing qualified lead. But most of the time, data-driven marketers, we are focused on creating opportunities, creating pipeline, creating revenue. We're trying to move past the marketing qualified lead. What is often overlooked is the very first step that's important, especially in an account-based world, creating engagement. So if we have to create engagement, we have to better prioritize, we have to better target and orchestrate, which we're talking about today. So that's the thing that I would stress as we think about the funnel. Intent data is really going to help us create engagement where in an ideal world, no pun intended, we can engage 100% of the folks who are showing intent data if we're doing the best possible job we can in how we go and market towards those individuals.
Right, which when we're looking, excuse me, when we're looking at intent data and we're looking at engagement, it's important to understand the relative scale differences. And as Chris walked through that, we're looking at a slide that sort of shows really the takeaway that first-party data is not enough. If you think first of the number of prospects that booked a demo, that's a pretty small amount, a pretty small number. A larger number would be those that engaged on your site. But a much larger number is those that are engaging across the web, consuming research and are actively interested, but you have not yet got them into those engaged with you or booked a demo. So that really is, it really is an engagement that you're not yet able to see.
That's great. I love that. And, you know, one thing I want to pause and slow down a bit on this slide when we talk about prioritization, because we can prioritize based on engageability. And if we look at the three different types of data or different descriptions that we're offering here, when we have intent data, literally those are insights from content consumption that's happening. And the third-party data that Mark was just talking about is extremely important because you're probably not capturing this on our website, right? That's literally what we're doing with intent data. That allows us to start to understand if a target account is searching a competitor or if an account is starting to do research about the buying process that you may have no visibility into without intent data, which lets us prioritize that to say, we think we can increase our engagement because they are literally in the process of seeking this information out right now. We should know what to say. We should know what to do. Secondly, engagement data. This is insights from our own properties. So if we see that a target account is searching on our website, obviously we will prioritize that. It's the same as a demo request or someone taking a meeting. We're going to put that at high on the list for our sellers to focus on, for our SDRs to do outreach to. That's going to be a very important way that we prioritize. And then third, for program fit. So accounts that are chosen for a campaign, usually the most common example that we see across the board is going to be industry focused. So, we may say this is persona focused, it could be use case focused, but an example is if we have an oil and gas account that's chosen for an oil and gas campaign. If we look at the differences between the three different types of information we're looking at here, we're literally comparing a target account that's searching for information from one of your competitors versus an account that was predetermined from our ICP process, which that should easily help us to prioritize those accounts and determine which we're going to invest the most time and resources towards. And then this moves us into orchestration. Now, Mark and I have covered a lot already, but most importantly, if we do not take advantage of this information, if we don't start to capitalize on capturing intent, understanding who's researching to buy, and bring that into well-orchestrated workflows where we're saying what they want to hear, literally, we are giving them information on exactly what they're researching, that's where the secret sauce is, in my opinion. So, Mark, you may have a different view there as we talk through this, but this is one of the most important sections for me. And one illustrative stat that we see for this, 49% of organizations cite pipeline and demand gen as their number one critical 2021 initiative. So literally number one. Now, there are a lot of other variables and how they may be picking the prioritization, but if I call your attention to the very small text on the bottom left, you'll see that the source here is actually a Gartner Chief Sales Officer priority study, not Chief Marketing Officer priority study. So when we talk to the heads of selling, their number one priority, almost half of the time, 49% of the time, is more pipeline and better demand generation. So we have to start to solve this. And we also know from lots of research, so this was the 2019 Gartner Buyer Survey, and there's an updated one that's coming out, but active buyers are overwhelmed and we have to reach them at the right time. So if we read through this visual here, the question was the amount of trustworthy information we encountered as part of this purchase was overwhelming. So that was the prompt. And 50% agreed with that, to say that, yes, I wanted to learn more and I was still overwhelmed. So not only do we need to take advantage of intent data and the information that we're capturing there, we have to do a better job of communicating the right information at the right level to exceed buyer expectations.
And this point about orchestration is so critical, and we're going to get into this right now. When we were preparing the webinar, I wanted to do the Gartner hype cycle of intent data, which oftentimes in our experience, and I think Chris's as well, customers feel that once you get this, everything will be magically fixed because we'll know literally when companies are going to buy. But that is then falls into the trough of disillusionment, in that you actually have to put it into process and flow it through your systems. And it truly is not magical. And so that orchestration piece is what we'll segue into now. And in three key areas. We've talked a lot, not on this webinar, but over time, around sales and marketing aligning. And the question was, well, ultimately, what should they align around other than revenue, which is an outcome? So intent data does allow teams, sales and marketing teams, to be aligned on both the interest and the identity or the account in a few ways. The first is full funnel marketing campaigns that are more efficient and effective. The second is more informed lead scoring and routing, and making sure that the right leads get to sales with the right priority. And then relevance and personalization. If we think all the way back to the beginning of what's going on in the macro landscape, increased relevance is now probably table stakes for any sales and marketing team. So we'll go a little bit further on these. The first, full funnel campaigns aligning around intent. So if you're looking at this graphic, you see that Brady Inc. Is consuming or is interested in the topics network security and application security. And that's indicated by their score, which is 87, higher than 60. And this, and the marketer, in this instance, it's Fortinet. They have created landing pages based on that particular topic that Brady's interested in. So the content, the copy, the graphics are all increasingly or increased relevance and pushed through top of funnel all the way through bottom of funnel campaigns. And all of this sort of starts like, yes, if you deliver things from a sales and marketing point of view that people are interested in, the engagement will be higher. So the next, and here's, this is not Fortinet, they'll come in later, but another customer talking about this idea of ads and nurture emails and phone calls all connecting on the same topics. And so that sort of holistic relevance is really what we're talking about when we advocate for full funnel marketing aligned by intent data. The second is more informed lead scoring. And this is when your marketing automation platform, ideally connected to your CRM, can pass the intensity of the topic, intensity of the interest, along with the specific topics around a particular company. And so in this graphic, we're looking at company ABC. They have a 91, which is quite high level of intensity and level of interest on the topics network security, application security. So the orchestration action there is to immediately route that to the BDR, to an SDR, and AE with a stamp call now. This is quote unquote hot, according to intent data. Company XYZ is at a 62. So maybe they're just entering the research phase that, for network security is a probably long buying cycle. So at that point, not the best to immediately route to a BDR and SDR because those are expensive resources, and you also don't want to wind them up disillusioned and say, well, this wasn't really that hot, but put them into a nurture program, nurture track that speaks to these particular topics that they're interested in. Here is actually Fortinet talking about just that, where to spend the time on which topics as it relates to the BDR team, their BDR team, and just getting more sort of ROI out of the investment in very expensive resources. The third piece here is the relevance. It's not just about which companies to call, which are more actively in market versus beginning their journey. It is, what is the substance and what are they interested in? And this graphic, company ABC has there's sort of two companies that might look the same. They might be firmographically alike. They might be in your ICP list or your ABM targeting list, and they have close to the same scores. So their intensity of research and interest, 82 and 79, is pretty similar. Yet they are framing their buying journey a little differently. ABC is looking at specific topics, business intelligence and business analytics, whereas XYZ is looking at business analytics, sales analytics, data modeling. And that then can drive the outreach to be really specific about what the terms that company is understanding their own buying process, as opposed to what we as marketing and sales organizations sometimes try to impose on the buyer's journey. And an example here, Salesforce, a longtime customer/partner, Bombora, 33% reduction in sales cycle because they got smarter about routing leads to around specific accounts, as well as the relevance. And what we see broadly across a fairly large set of Bombora customers are some benchmarks that, again, are not surprising if you understand what is at the core, which is interest. So we see between a 30 and up to 120% increase in terms of marketing engagement, 20 to 40% reduction in cost per lead, between a 1 and 3 times doubling of marketing budget, because you're just not going at ROI, you're just not going after companies that are not in a cycle. And then pipeline expansion, doubling or tripling based on efficacy of sales efforts. So those are some of the results when you're employing this type of strategy. I'll give it back to Chris to bring us into the home stretch, and I'm sure we'll have some time to address a few of these questions.
Thank you, Mark. And the key takeaway. So in addition to the 3 areas that we discussed, we talked about identification, we talked about prioritization, and we talked about orchestration. So we have to identify our accounts with intent, hopefully, and with our ideal customer profile. We have to better prioritize our accounts, and we have to do a better job of orchestration. So to bring that home, we're seeing that leading B2B organizations are, number one, they're increasingly relying on intent data as a core element of all of their initiatives. So data science, marketing, sales, we're actually seeing both marketing and sales leaders that are pulling intent data into their organization. And if we look at the visual to the right, you'll see that we have multiple high priority areas, but our highest priority is when we can find our ideal customer profile, all of those accounts who have intent and we have engagement or can create engagement. That is our A++ top of the list. But 3 things to take away today. Number 1, we have to combine intent data with the best fit and account engagement models to identify which accounts to prioritize. Number 2, take the guesswork out of sales and marketing and use intent data to determine the messaging and the next best action. That's where we're getting into orchestration. If we have intent data and we aren't capitalizing on that or delivering a more valuable conversation for the buyer, then we as marketers are making a misstep with how we work with sales. And then number 3, create a holistic approach to sales and marketing by integrating intent data into all your sources of data, your data lakes, your customer experience platforms, and your fire models to start to escalate accounts that are showing intent and to make sure that we have well-orchestrated programs to apply for the various folks that are showing intent. So that's my summary, Mark. If there's anything you want to add, I'll pass it back over to you before questions.
That's great. I think that is an apt summary. Let us go then to the questions here. First question, which came early on, which makes sense. What type of data sources does Bombora use for insights on intent data? And talking about the breadth and depth. Indeed, Bombora's data comes from a cooperative of web publishers. Hundreds of media companies, encompassing thousands of websites. And what happens is our technology reads using NLP, BERT-based NLP, for those data scientists in the group, understands the meaning of the topics on the page. And this is not keywords. Keywords can feed into this, but it's something that really makes the difference between, for instance, what is the store's stock of apples versus what is the price of Apple's stock. So truly understanding what is the meaning of the page on these thousands of websites, and then tying the consumption of those topics to specific companies, to domains. And the scale of that is massive. We've got about 20 billion monthly content consumption events, which is a company consuming content on that topic. And so that is where this data comes from. Again, it's fully consent-based, and holistically, the publishers who contribute their data in realize value in the classic cooperative approach. Let's see, the next one here is how can intent data work for smaller organizations with lower budgets? And is there a plan for smaller businesses only? Indeed. Yeah, the history of intent data, if you will, is that it started with the largest organizations and most sophisticated organizations on the planet because they had the capabilities to process it and also realized 1 or 2 percentage points of lift in a sales team or region is massive money. But now over the past few years, we've been able to bring that, things like this webinar, bring that downstream to smaller organizations. So we even have a free product that you can use to try it. It's called Company Surge Alerts, and the data is widely available in a lot of partners. So yes, we have that. And in terms of how to get the most value out of it, we talked about orchestration. Sometimes it's as simple as handing a spreadsheet to some of your best SDRs and AEs and having that work. That's not the ideal state, but that can pay for itself actually pretty quickly, given the price point. So yes, this is for Chris, I think. How much value does account prioritization and scoring really provide over mass marketing? How do we know that, I guess you could read this, how do we know that a prioritized focus will produce positive ROI instead of sticking to our usual full CRM market? All right.
It's a great question, and I have some data for you. So I will answer it with both data and anecdotal evidence. The first thing I want to stress, I do see the detailed question here, and there is always a delicate balance we have to strike between demand generation, if we call that like the broader programs, right? Demand generation and account-based. We typically see about 60% of the budget that's been towards demand generation, 40% account-based, but that's in the high growth data set. I need a broader spectrum to apply that to every company. Okay, here comes the data. So if you I was going to say pencils and pens, I may be the only one that actually writes with these. You can type this out. But the first big thing I would stress, I have both data that we've been talking about for a while at TOPO and Gartner, and some data that I was looking at this week. So the first point, for account base, when we're looking at conversion rates throughout the funnel, once we have an opportunity, now account based, we're assuming that is through the ideal customer profile or intent data, there is prioritization, there is qualification, all the principles of account based. When we studied this for high growth SaaS and for tech, the closed won rate, so opportunity to closed won, was 53%. 53%. And then when we studied the same organizations and followed throughout the funnel, stage by stage conversion rates, the opportunity to closed won for volume or demand generation was 19%. So 53% versus 19%. Now, I stress, there's always a balance because we're trying to fill the pipeline at all times. So we need both. I do not see a ton of organizations that are all account-based, or there's still some that are all demand generation, but there's always going to be the balance. And then one other quick data point that I'll stress, the difference in the performance of the broader programs, so what I would call demand generation, when we looked at the high growth data set, so the fastest growing companies in the world, they converted a lead, so a form fill, essentially, a lead to an engaged lead or marketing qualified lead 63% of the time. So that's already targeted. If we're converting 63% of our leads to an MQL, the rest of the world, so outside of the fastest growing companies in the world, this is data from 2019 at Gartner, but the rest of the world, that form fill to marketing qualified lead was 15%. So what I'm really stressing here, there are differences in how we execute demand generation, if it's targeted or not, how broad the top entry point of our funnel is, but then we also see a huge conversion rate difference at the bottom of the funnel.
Great. I would add, and this is not something that is often discussed, but we believe in it, in what about, I guess in that case, it's the majority of your database of prospects that are interested, what's the cost of continuing to spam them effectively? And we talk about sustainable marketing and sustainable selling, and striking that balance of knowing that nobody got into this business to get 1% and 2% response rates, and the sort of weaponization of marketing and selling using technology and data has this impact on the attention, the brand trust of the ecosystem and of our buyers. And that goes all the way back to those first slides. So that's something else that has a real impact ultimately over time. So let's see here. What are some, this is, I guess, for us, what are some triggered intent-based marketing campaigns demand gen managers can run? Of course, alerting sales is sort of the, table stakes does not do its service, but alerting sales when their prospects are in market, and have what the score is, as we talked about, and telling them. I mean, you think, I was a sales rep once, and you come in and you look at your list and you're struggling to figure out, what should I do? Who should I call? What should I say? So giving them that direction is sort of like the best way to immediate value. We're going to have a webinar next month with a company called CRM Next, that they're going to talk about personalization of marketing campaigns. Another piece, and we didn't cover this in the presentation, but this idea of understanding intent and interest is also applicable to retention, upsell, and churn reduction. And so if you have an account base and your customer success reps, they can look and understand, is my customer increasing their research on competitors' brands, for instance? Are they looking for alternative solutions? And that's an opportunity for customer success to get in there and understand what's going on and whether there are higher risks or things. So that's a parallel way of actioning this. This one, I guess you could see these, Chris. So are you referencing corporate executive board research?
Yeah, I answered that. So I sent some information there, video. So I do think that number was up to date, but if not, I'm happy to connect on that one.
Cool. Okay, 3 and 5. Let's see, these are great questions. How to know which accounts or leads are looking for information from competitors. I think I understand that from the point of view of a competitor's brand is a topic effectively. And so understanding, actually we do this at Bombora, we list a set of competitors and look to see, are the interest levels at accounts increasing relative to our competitive set? And so it would be, I think, if I understand, as simple as setting up those topics as well as the larger category and terms. Okay, let's see. Gosh, this is really cool. Let's see, cookieless impact. Okay, this is an important one and relevant for Bombora. The way that we collect the data across the cooperative that I mentioned is not dependent on cookies to identify both the topics via NLP as well as the companies that are consuming that. And so we're always able to connect those two things independent of cookies. What is dependent is some of the activation and the targeting of we call it audience solutions, but it's using the programmatic ecosystem to target based on that data for programmatic advertising mostly. The two good things is, one, these are accounts. So we're not targeting individuals and we're targeting at the account level, which is more privacy compliant. And the other piece is that as the entire ecosystem moves to whatever ultimate solution, our data will also be able to be actioned, whether it's via different types of third-party IDs or contextual. So there's a lot of different ways to potentially action the data when cookies go away, but the core identification of intent is not at risk, if you will. And I think we're probably coming up on time here. You want to leave them hoping for more. But yeah, so let's, I think this is we're at the top of the hour. We're getting close. So I think there's one more. Yeah, no, I think that's it. I think we've covered them all. So let's see, final notes. Yes, as we said, the recording will go out. Thank you all so much for coming. A lot of interest. Chris, thank you so much for participating. This has been fun. And I hope folks have learned a bit. This is not, it's not just about, we want to sell you some data. It's about, we're all trying to move the industry forward to a place of being more relevant to prospects and customers. So thank you all and have a good week.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Mark.